Good evening, church. Today we'll be reading from Philippians, which is on the page 1227, but technology is great and it will also be on the screens. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. The word of the Lord.
So before we do something slightly different, I just want to share a very quick story that has nothing to do with the sermon. But when I was at seminary, there were 140 students in this one class where the principal was teaching. And as we sat there, he said to us, who here went to church this Sunday? Now, this is 140 students who are all practicing to be pastors, so they all naturally raised their hand, whether they'd been to church or not. They all raised their hand, because you're supposed to go to church. Then he said, out of 140 students, he said this. He said, who of you can remember the 3 points of the sermon? 140 students, all of whom are studying to be pastors in a top seminary. How many hands do you think raised? 3. 3 people remembered the sermon from that Sunday. Now, I love preaching, and I think there's something powerful in preaching. God tells us to preach, but sometimes it's not the best form of teaching. And so because we're a smaller group tonight, that gives me opportunity to do something different. Now, I hadn't planned to do this, but I saw the group and I thought, let's try something. So can we do this? Can you leave your chairs, come get chairs here, and let's make a semicircle, and let's sit together, and let's do church a little bit differently, but more ancient style, where we have a bit of discussion. So you want to come forward, get a chair. If you don't want to speak, I'm not going to force you to speak, but come, let's have a discussion together. Try and make it like a little bit of a half circle. Now, here's the beauty of doing a half circle. There shouldn't be a space between you. You should be sitting next to someone, okay? I know at church you like to sit away from people, but here we sit next to people. Okay, so find someone, sit next to them. Let's get comfortable. can find a seat. If we can't find a seat, we'll move out a little bit. Cool, everyone should have a seat. There's a seat next to MJ. I promise you, she's not going to compel you to do anything. Okay? Great. Everyone should be in. MJ and Griffey, just if you can have those mics just handy in case people need them. I'm going to ask you to do more than you have to usually at leading a service. Okay. Good. Okay. So the first thing as we read in Philippians, as we speak about finding joy, one of the things that I've often thought about is different heroes. And what strikes me about heroes is how they're steady, how they all act a certain way. And so what I want you to do very quickly, just chatting to the person next to you, just talk to them very quickly, who is your hero? Now, it can be a hero that actually exists, so a person from history, or a person, cricket player, sports player, or it can be a fictional character. Maybe you're really into Superman or whoever it is. But just speak to the person next to you just very quickly. Who's your favorite hero and why? And let's not do the Christian thing and say Jesus, okay? Jesus is obviously the right answer. But just quickly, just to the person next to you, just very quickly, say who your hero is. Okay, so you've probably all sort of shared your hero. As I think of some of the heroes that I love watching movies. And some of my favorite heroes or favorite movies, I haven't seen the second one out yet, but these Gladiator, I remember that movie. There's Braveheart, and then all the superhero movies as well. And something that I love about those heroes, something that appeals to me, is that no matter what is happening, they stay the same. Now they grow, but they're steady. They go with it. I mean, that's something that's often appealing about a hero. If you take Spider-Man, one of the appealing things about Spider-Man is that no matter what's happening, he sticks with it. He goes. They always have that blood coming from the side of his face, and he goes, I'm just going to keep going. No matter the circumstance, they remain strong and steady. And there's something amazing about that. And we all, I think, have a desire to be somewhat of a hero. But whenever I think about that, I'm like, I don't know if I'm that person who, no matter the circumstance, I'm going to stay the same. In fact, if I really think about it, often what happens in life when circumstances are happening is I change because of the circumstances. If life gets difficult, it changes the way I react to certain things. Often the way I react to certain things when life gets difficult, I love to escape. And so I'm just like, I don't want to be a part of this. If you're having conflict with me, I'm just going to run away slightly. Whereas I feel like the hero would go, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to deal with this conflict. Or if there's difficulty in the family, I'm going to stick here. If I'm struggling financially, I'm going to stick with it. Whereas my often reaction is to leave. Maybe your reaction is anger or anxiety or whatever it is. But I think there's something to be found in trying to be that hero, but often what we think is that That's only for the really strong people of this world. And because of that, when we think of other things like joy, for example, we often think of joy as fleeting. It happens occasionally. With the circumstance, if the circumstance is right, then I am joyful, instead of being joyful all the time. Now, go to your text quickly and look at Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4. Just those very first few words. Remembering the series has all been about the concept of finding joy. Verse 4 and 4 says this, rejoice in the Lord occasionally. Sometimes. Most often. No, what does it say? Rejoice in the Lord? Always. Now, you may be thinking, well, what does it say in the Greek, Dave? Maybe the Greek has a different connotation to it. Maybe as you look at this word, it has a little bit of a change. And in fact, it does. What it means is all the time. Always is the idea here. Rejoice in the Lord always. And just as a reminder, when Paul is writing this, he is in prison. He's not on the beach. He's not, everything's great. He's in prison. He's in prison for his faith. And he says, rejoice in the Lord always. As we look at Paul, Paul is definitely a hero of the faith. And part of the reason he is a hero of the faith is because the character that he presents is one who is steady always. One who represents the whole fruit of the Spirit always. And one of those fruit being joy. Now, just for a moment, just very quickly in your mind, think about what would it look like to be joyful always? What would your life look like? If when you woke up tomorrow, you were joyful, not just because Christmas is coming, but you were joyful all the time. When we get into the new year and money is tighter, you are joyful. What would that look like? What would that feel like? I think, if we're honest with ourselves, it's a desire we have. And I think, as we look at the text, God gives us a way to do that. Finding joy is a possibility. It's not just a hero in some movie that is never going to be attainable for us. It's something that is attainable for us. But to find that, we're going to come back to that section. We're going to first start in verse 8, which says this, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, what? Think on these things. Think on these things. Now, as I think about that, I go, well, Paul, you're writing that in a different time. The modern age, it's really difficult to think on these things. In fact, as you just think about the modern age, and talk amongst yourselves very quickly, but then I want to hear a couple of thoughts from it, but just with a few people around you. What does the modern age tell us that's not true? What does the modern age tell us that is not noble, meaning of right character? What is not right, or what is not pure? What is not lovely or seeking peace? What does the world tell us? And when I think about the world, I'm not just talking about presidents or whatever. I'm talking about, what does Netflix tell you? What does Disney and Prime and Apple TV and DSTV and all these things? What do they tell you? What does the internet tell you? What do they tell you that is not these things? Quickly have a chat about it with the people next to you. Okay, so some of you have shared a couple of ideas, things that the world shares that aren't true in that. I see Tyrese has got one of the mics, or Griffith. No, I wasn't saying they had to share. Let's just get a couple of ideas, just very quickly. What does the world tell us that aren't these things? Okay, go for it, Tim. Just what are some of the things that you think the world tells us that are opposite of these? Yeah.
No, for me it's just the world tells us to put our joy into our wealth and where we stand in society.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like without if you're not, a millionaire by this age, if you don't have money at this age, you're worth nothing.
Yeah.
That's not where your worth is.
Yeah. And so it's that lie that then becomes a truth for us. And so then our whole life starts to move in that direction. Yeah, that's great. What's some other ones? Yeah, so it's in what we value, hey? So that idea, like, if I just have this thing, just that one more thing, it'll fulfill me. Yeah, great, go for it.
I see I have a mic now.
Yeah.
I'm bouncing off your suggestion. I think also self-care culture is important, but that you can make your own joy and stability from scratch.
Yeah.
Like if you bullet journal and if you walk and if you drink enough water and if you sleep 8 hours and if you do all of the things that you're supposed to do, you can like make your own joy and stability. And self-care and mental health is really important, but like you can't make that all yourself. Like you're tapping into God and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. So, and how often does it happen when we're driving on the street and well, maybe it doesn't happen for you, but it happens for me, driving on the street and I see those people running and they're going like, wow, those people have got it together. Yeah. And then you see that other person in the coffee shop typing away, getting their work done. You go, that person's got it together. And there's always this picture of if I can just reach that sort of level in terms of I'm doing all the right things, then I can be joyful, or then I'll be complete. It's often this idea with the world and what it speaks about, especially in terms of some of the stuff that we watch, it can go to two extremes when it speaks to us as people. The one extreme can be this: you are worth nothing. You are absolutely useless. You will never amount to anything. That's what some of the world tells us in terms of some of the things that you're saying. If you don't reach this, you are nothing. Or the world can go to the other extreme and go, you are everything. It's all about you. You are the very picture of what the world should be. And it jumps to these two extremes. And our minds then think on those things all the time. And when we think on those things, are we not surprised that we do not find joy? When we think on things that are not right, when we think on things that are not pure, I'm not advocating that you should never watch Netflix or any of those things. But if you're only watching stuff that is just pumping gunk into your brain 24/7, are you not surprised that you aren't finding joy? As God speaks to us, as Paul is speaking here, he's saying, man, think on these things that are right and that are lovely. And if you think on those things, maybe what you'll find is joy. I'm not saying you shouldn't be people who read the news, but when you read the news, what does the news pump out? A lot of negative stuff. And if you only think on those things and never bring God into it, you're only going to be negative. You got to find what is right and true. And it's a hard call, this. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. One of the ways in which we find joy is in our mind. What are you thinking about? What are you constantly going towards? I find some of the biggest problems in my life often is that when I'm trying to find rest, I find rest in binge watching something, or I find rest in doing stuff that is just not helping me. We have to be thinking on things that are good, because when we do, that's when we can find joy. The next part, just to jump, often where we sometimes don't find joy, and this is connected to what you were saying, Tim, earlier, is from verse 10 to verse 14, verse 13, we then have this picture of Paul speaking as he goes, the idea of what he has. And he's so thankful to the Philippian church because they help him in his need. But notice what he says here, verse 11. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstance. I know what is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learnt the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And as we look at Paul's life, he knew what want was. He knew what poverty was. He had nothing at certain times. And at other times, he had much more. But that's where this verse comes on. That verse that is on mugs and pens all over Christian bookstores. I can do all things. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. In other versions, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That verse is coming from not the idea that, hey, I can go fly in the sky. No, the idea here is that I can do all things whether I'm in financial need or not. So what Paul is speaking about here is his service to the Lord, his emotions, the way in which he thinks about things is not determined by what's in his bank account. I've so many times in my life been in that place where I've gone, if I could just have this amount of money, then I'll be able to do this. If I could just get this thing, then I'll be in a better place. Lord, if you could just give us enough money so that we cover all our expenses in the month, then Lord, man, the way I will serve you will be phenomenal. That is not the way of Christ. The way of Christ is I serve and I live out the fruits of the Spirit regardless of the circumstances. But that's difficult, isn't it? It's a really hard thing to do. Just quickly, once again, as you sit next to people, why is it difficult? Why is money so present on our mind? Why is it difficult to be joyful when the bank account is empty? And I really want you to think about that, not just to go, because we should have money, but really think about why. Why is it so difficult to be joyful when there's not enough? Just quickly chat amongst yourselves. Good, if you can take 30 seconds to wrap up there. Okay, great. Just one or two to share just on that. I did hear, sorry, now I'm going to put the mic on one of you two. I did hear some good stuff on you guys. So one of you, if you wouldn't mind sharing just on what, I just love that word freedom that you used there. But just as well, just thinking about what you would just share on that. Whoever it is, whether it's MJ or...
I don't really, sorry, well, it's loud. I really don't want to do this. No, we spoke about something that's quite interesting. It's around two different things were raised, but it's freedom.
Yeah.
That's what financial stability gives you. You can tie it into the concept of agency, would be another way of putting it. And then you could look at masculinity, which is the other part, where men have different roles which I actually agree on, but we have to provide, and then it's all different and causes stresses. But I'm going to pass. I didn't.
No, that's great. That's really, really good. Freedom. I really like that word there that you use it. Our thought pattern is that financial stability brings us freedom, and I'm not denying that it doesn't bring that, but I think there's something about defining what freedom is. So we'll come to that. Someone else who would like to share? Go for it. Thank you.
Hi, I was going to say that in books I've read, like even 30, 40 years ago, if somebody had like not a very high-powered job, he was a bus conductor or something to that effect, it just seemed that people with menial jobs still could afford a home and send their children to school and have food on the table. Whereas nowadays, a menial job does not provide that anymore.
Yeah.
There's a certain salary you have to earn in order to pay the mortgage or the rent and buy the food and send your children to school.
Yeah.
So somewhere something's gone wrong.
And that's getting increasingly worse every day.
Yes.
It doesn't ever feel like it's getting better. I always love that idea of the petrol price. Like the petrol price goes down 20 cents and you're like, yes. And then next week goes up 50 cents. And they just play this game the whole time. It just seems to be getting harder and harder and harder. That is a definite reality, yeah. Anyone else want to share? Yep. Good.
Are very severe. Like if you can't pay your rent, you don't have anywhere to live, and that's a very scary concept. And you can't cultivate joy and fear. Well, it's hard to cultivate joy and fear together.
Yeah.
At the same time, or
Yeah.
not being able to feed your family. It's difficult to cultivate those things together.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, go for it.
It was also shared between myself and Tim, like how comparison is often like the thief of joy, and like you always are comparing yourself amongst other people or other things or other jobs or situations or homes, and like you could never feel content in like what you have, although what you have is great. So yeah, like, and the fear of missing out and not being like that, like similarly ties in with like financial situations.
Yeah, thanks for that. The reality is, as I share this in a church within the southern suburbs of Cape Town, is that it could be a lot worse. And some of those fears could be a reality for us. There are many people who are visiting in churches right now who are not in buildings. And when they go home, they're not going to buildings. And that can happen anywhere, and is the majority of the world. We're living in top 5% here, just in being in this building. But I think where we've gone wrong is that we've let that circumstance be the one that dictates how we think and how we feel. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't have impact. It does have impact. It's hard for people who are going going home to no home. I'm not saying that's easy at all. But if we let money be the thing that dictates everything within our lives, we end up becoming slaves to it, which is what I mean by that idea. We lose the idea of freedom. I think what Paul is presenting here is the idea of what it means to be truly free within God. It's the idea in which that he lets God be the one that decides what he's supposed to feel, rather than the circumstances. The circumstances will happen no matter what. They could be good, they could be bad. But where does Paul find his strength? Go back to verse 13 again. Verse 13, he finds his strength in God. That's where he finds his strength. I don't know how you do this, but there was a lady who we were ministering to up in Joburg. She lived in a township. And just a phenomenal woman who had joy on a level which I had. But every single night, she'd bring her kids around the table, and they would have no food. But she would put out plates, and there would be nothing on the plates, and she would say to her kids, it's now time for us to have grace and to thank God for what he's given us. She had joy, even though she had nothing. And there were hard times for her. But she did not let her circumstances determine her finding joy. She lived out verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Philippians really is a book about joy. Joy despite the circumstances. Joy in every circumstance is the idea. And so much so that Paul repeats it twice here in this verse. Rejoice. I'll say it again. Rejoice. So you go to Paul, how? How do we do it, Paul? Well, one, as we've already mentioned, we find joy in taking care of our mind. We find joy, at least partially here, in not becoming slaves to what the world gives us. But then we also find joy in this. When times are difficult, when it seems that the world is encroaching upon us, look at what verse 5 says. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. God is coming. But then here, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer, petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. This comes before the part where he speaks about strength in God. You are to bring everything to God. And then we get verse 7. And this is where we find joy. We find joy ultimately from God, a God who gives a peace that transcends all understanding. Let me explain that to you, what that means. I have no idea. Why? Because it transcends all understanding. It says it right there in the text. This is a peace that is supernatural. This is not a peace that two governments come together and make peace. No, this is a peace that goes beyond. It's a peace that despite your circumstances, you find when God gives it to you as you pray to him. Notice this peace comes not in when God gives you the things that you need. It comes to you when you give over to God everything. As you pray to him and give him everything, you find peace. Now this next line is going to sound very, very harsh, and I apologize for it, but I'm saying it as one that it's convicting to me as well. But if your prayers are not bringing peace, you're probably not praying correctly. I know that sounds very harsh, but what I'm reading here from the text is that if we pray specifically, it should bring us peace. And often the reason I don't find peace when I pray is because I'm holding back from God. I don't want to hand things over to him fully. I want to keep a piece of it for myself. God, you have your way with my job, but I kind of want to keep this job and the salary it gives. Lord, you have your way with my family, but I really want my family to do this. Lord, you have your way with my wife, but Lord, I want her to react this way to me. No, to hand it over is to hand it over and go, God, you do what you want. It's that whole idea of laying it on the altar and going, God, I give this as a sacrifice to you. You do what you want. I think when you do that, that's when you find peace. We got to learn to start doing that, handing it over completely. And then God will give us peace. And this is what I love about this verse. Look how it finishes. Peace that will guard your hearts and your mind. Your heart that desires incorrect things, and your mind that wanders. When we bring prayers to Him truly, that peace makes us help think correctly and helps our heart desire correctly. Let us come and find that joy. This is a long journey, but I think it's a journey in which we can find joy. And so as closing up for us, if you wouldn't mind, and I know some of these people are strangers to you possibly, but if you can just share with them very quickly something that you need prayer in, and then for you to pray together. Remember when we started the series? We started the series with finding joy in partnership. We are partners together. Finding joy in the gospel after that, knowing what Christ has done for us. Finding joy in our attitude, God fixing our character and making us humble, as Lyle preached. So let's find that joy by sharing with one another what we need from God and then truly laying it on the altar. Will you do that with me right now? Just share amongst yourselves as you find partners to do so.